What's up, you scholars of enlightenment? We are back with another tech roundup for November 2021. I'm joined by my good buddy Ramsey Faragher again. Remember the real life Q from James Bond, according to Top Gear magazine. Ramsey, how have you been this month?
Hi, Sam. Very well, thank you. Looking forward to Christmas, as I'm sure you are too.
Yes, very much so. You've got a lot more kids than me, so you've got a lot more work to do on it. But yeah, looking very much. Have you got your present sorted?
No, not at all.
No.
Got plenty more time thanks to Amazon Prime. Yeah.
Fair enough. Right. So, anything jumped out at you from the science and tech from November and December before I put out the ones that we sort of discussed previously? Anything else jump out?
Just that there's been some really interesting tech companies doing some really strange things over the last few months, of which we're going to pick on one today. So I think in the future we should probably do this as a bit of a feature to pull apart or investigate scientifically some tech-focused startups.
You said we might call it Theranos Corner. What tech startups have been up to this month? Usually bad things. And I'll make little jingles for these, like these little sections, right? We can have Theranos Corner and a nice little jingle that introduces us to it.
You could probably monetize it because you could sell it as due diligence to VCs so that they know who to invest in and who not to.
Sell it to you, right? So one of these tech startups that have been making a little bit of a splash, maybe literally this month, has been SpinLaunch. Now, SpinLaunch is a California-based company, and they completed their first kinetic launch this month. So this is a novel way of potentially launching satellites into orbit. So they did a novel kinetic energy-based launch from Spaceport America in New Mexico on October the 22nd, and they reached an altitude of tens of thousands of feet. And many people are calling this the biggest yeet in history. So essentially what this is a big whizzing centrifuge, whizzes round and then throws something up as high as it can go before it then starts its own rockets and goes under its own power into space. So if maybe we have a look, Ramsey, at the launch video, and then we'll talk a little bit more. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this is SpinLaunch's first test launch.
You wouldn't want to be standing there when it goes off.
No.
Big as the Empire State Building? I think they said that this one was.
Yeah. About as big as the Statue of Liberty, Empire State Building, that sort of.
Sorry, Statue of Liberty, exactly.
You got your American landmarks.
It's all the same. But the next one's going to be twice as big as the real one. So the premise is that when you're launching a chemical rocket at the moment, something like the Apollo 11 mission, like over 90% of that rocket was fuel when it took off in terms of the mass of the whole thing. And this is a lob something very, very high before you need to kick in the rocket engine and save something. Is the premise.
So we're playing that. Can you say that again, Ramsey? Because people might have had a little bit of trouble hearing what you were saying then, because the sound of the video was there.
Sorry, I didn't realize that. So the premise is that normal chemical-based rocket launches that we've all been using for since World War II. The higher you're trying to go, the more fuel you need on the Earth's surface to get going. So the Apollo 11 mission was over 90% of its mass when it took off was fuel. And so the argument here is if you can lob something really high first before you need to kick in the fuel and turn the engines on, then you can save yourself a lot of money and weight in terms of getting satellites into orbit. So they're claiming they might be able to do launches at kind of 500,000 that would normally be upwards of 10 million is the gist.
So they say, so they were founded in 2014 and they're part of this sort of crowd-funded field of firms in the United States, as you said, looking to reduce the cost of launches. So replacing most of the rocket booster with this essentially throwing it up as high as you can, and as you say, reducing the rocket size, the booster size, they say by about a factor of 20. So that obviously reduces the cost a great deal, and they say, because it's tick box nowadays, greater accessibility. Although I don't know, this is obviously going to be unmanned, so accessibility for who to launch stuff into orbit, I'm not exactly sure. But as you say,
I think it's low Earth orbit satellites.
Okay.
They're looking at the kind of SpaceX type, like a shoot. So the thing about low Earth orbit, which everyone's getting really excited about and putting communication satellites up, is that the satellites don't last very long in low Earth orbit. Their correction burns. It means they run out of fuel much more quickly than higher up stuff. So you have to keep replacing them. So if you're going to get in the game of, I'm going to have 40,000 satellites orbiting the Earth in low Earth orbit, serving my customers with the internet. Well, you're also going to have to keep replacing those 40,000 satellites every few years. Ka-ching, in come a company like this.
Yeah, so one thing they could do is a lot more launches per day than something like SpaceX, right? So they're saying they could do multiple orbits per day, which obviously remains to be seen. Other groups that they're sort of working alongside are looking at things like 3D printing rocket parts, reusing rocket parts. It all seems, moving towards, like you said, having lots and lots of launches per day. I'm waiting for, some of it seems a bit, I don't know, it just seems a bit higgledy-piggledy. I'm waiting for the sort of, the typical 1A question, the 3 drop balls to launch something into orbit, the question. So, but it all looks a bit silly, you think, when you look at it, but they've received more than $110 million in venture capital. And in January, they received another 35 million, and they've got partners including Airbus, GV, KPCB, Catapult Ventures, some really big players. So they're taking this pretty seriously.
Excellent pun with Catapult Ventures as well.
I know, right?
Both parties must be really pleased with that one.
I know, it's worked out. It's worked out nice.
But yeah, I mean, they've raised an awful lot of money, and there are some really interesting problems, let's say, that they'll have to overcome. Some of which are sort of highlighted in this video, I think.
Yeah.
There's possibly a little bit of kind of marketing spin gone on some of this video that we might be able to talk our way through. Should we dive in there, or are there some of the bits of background?
Yes, no. Let's talk about the physics of it. So this is essentially a new rocket launching system, like we've said. And I mean, if we go back a little bit in the video, you can see that it's essentially a giant centrifuge, right? The rocket's going to be on the end of an arm on the outside of the centrifuge. They whiz it around incredibly fast, speeding it up quite slowly, but for about an hour and a half. And they get it up to about 5,000 miles per hour going around in a circle. And the rocket at this point is feeling about 10,000 G. So a normal rocket, you get about 5 to 7 G. So this is obviously going to be unmanned. There's not going to be anyone sat in this thing to be thrown around. But 10,000 G. And then once it's spun up to the velocity you want, essentially a little port opens for a very short period of time. And instead of it going around another circle, it's going to fly off up a ramp and be thrown high into the stratosphere. And then when it reaches about 200,000 feet in altitude, it's going to burn its own chemical rockets and proceed up into orbit. And the idea here is there's not much atmosphere left. There's not much air thickness left. So it'll be very easy to then just do a quick burn and reach up into orbit and get out of the atmosphere. So this seems like it's going to be for launching, space equipment, basically. So they say they've tested things like solar cells, radio systems, telescope lenses, GPS, things like this that they say you could subject to these very large accelerations and they would survive and you could throw them into space. Now, there's some other scientists who aren't so convinced, and I'm not so convinced. I think your stuff's going to get crushed against the wall before it gets thrown up. But
there is a problem with that it's all very well to test some of the components that are going to be involved in the system, but you need to test the one component that is the most delicate, that if it breaks, the whole thing's broken.
Yeah.
So they haven't talked about testing things like hinges or anything involving kind of something that needs to have moving parts after you've subjected the thing to very high G-force.
We're not sending James Webb up on this thing, because apparently that needs we're going to come on to that.
Yeah,
needs to be handled with care.
That doesn't want to be dropped again by this thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's certainly the case that we already know that there are smart munitions that get fired out of artillery weapons that launch at over 1,000 G, and the electronics inside, there are kind of GPS guided munitions that get fired out of guns, basically, and other things that we already have some understanding that certain electronic components can survive high G forces and things like this. But you're talking about wanting to potentially launch stuff that has to unfold solar panels with delicate linkages and have moving parts and stuff. So
these are not going to be simple systems.
To test the solar cell. You want to test the complicated moving parts that normally put the solar cell away from the satellite, and check that thing can still move after you've put 1,500 Gs through it.
I can see them just throwing all the components up into space and then having to go and grab them and put them all together in situ. Yeah, it's all well and good, as you say, saying, look, we can throw some little bits and pieces up into orbit, but getting something that's a bit more delicate, you're quite constrained probably in what you can launch in this fashion. And this one, as you mentioned on the video, is only a 1/3 scale model, which is, prototype. The full one's going to be 300 feet tall, so it's going to be even faster, more powerful, which is 91 meters tall, so nearly 100 meters tall, the size of the Statue of Liberty. And this test had no rocket engine, but it did break the world record already for the world's fastest rotational system. So we're already dealing with incredibly high energies, incredibly high G-forces, incredibly fast rotating systems. And Ramsey, you had a bit of a misgiving, or a couple of misgivings with that when we look at this video, when we see the thing sort of coming out of the launch. Yeah. What did you notice? Just let me get to that part, and we'll have a look.
So certainly, if you're going to be spinning this thing incredibly fast, you need to be able to time releasing it just right. And they've mentioned, if you pause it there, for example, great, perfect. There's a few things that are interesting about this. So they mentioned elsewhere in their literature that they can kind of time their release to better than a millisecond or something. But quick back of the envelope check, and
millisecond seems quite long compared to the speed of one revolution of that thing, right?
So basically, across a millisecond, the release angle, if you're giving yourself a tolerance of a millisecond of releasing it, you're talking about plus or minus around 3 degrees. And in fact, we're seeing that here. This thing is tearing at an angle through that sheet. It's not coming cleanly in a straight line through that sheet. And in fact, the next, keep this on for a moment, because we're going to talk about some of the bits, but the next few moments of this video show the thing. Basically, there's a shot in the video where if you pause it and go frame by frame, you can see the thing is actually tumbling out of the launch tube. But the thing about this that's interesting is that I don't think this test had a very high vacuum. It doesn't appear, we don't know, although we could figure it out, we could try and calculate exactly how much time this penetration of that sheet represents, but I would have expected to see more of the effects of the air trying to rush in at the same time as that object was coming out. And those effects aren't really there. So I wouldn't be surprised if they did a very slow spin up, didn't really evacuate this tube much at all. Maybe they haven't actually got that stage working properly. And they simply lobbed this thing with, the system running at a moderate speed, didn't really evacuate the tube, didn't actually test some of the hardest bits of the system. And certainly, like I said, the thing seems to be tumbling when it comes out, which is definitely not to plan. So I think they've got a lot of things. Of the many problems I have with this, I remember another reason I don't think they've evacuated the tube. It's on their own promo video when they show the footage of the inside of the chamber. It's going whoomp, 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 which is the sound of the air, of course, inside the system.
Okay. Can we get
As the
let's
arms
see
go
if
around.
let's see if we can find that bit. Where is it?
It's
Is that
it's it's here. It's that bit
is
there
it
where
this
you
bit
see this.
here? So
Yeah.
if I put the sound back on, and maybe we can.
All right, everybody, prepare for launch.
Okay, yeah. So we got the. You can hear the sort of whizzing of the blades.
Everybody, prepare for launch.
So I mean, maybe they only partially evacuate it anyway, but still, you want to.
They said the vacuum is not particularly good. So when the guy that I think it's the CEO Yanni was talking to the papers, he said basically that they wanted to build this huge evacuated tube, and obviously there's not many people who build these things, so they got one quote for like $20 million and decided no, that's too much. We're going to build it ourselves. And then it says in this article that they spent 8 months. And they bought vacuum tubes and vacuum pumps on eBay and $500,000 worth of steel and built the world's 6th largest vacuum chamber by diameter. So it sounds like maybe because it's the prototype, they haven't done a perfect job with it. So it's I think it's a pretty shoddy job they've done with the vacuum. So it's not particular. And this is a big problem, right? Because if you're going to do the whole thing, the resistance goes as the velocity squared that you're going round. So if you have a really poor vacuum, it's more and more energy that you're leaking as you go faster and faster around this rotation. So a really high vacuum is something you're going to need to really get those costs down, get the energy down, because the energy isn't just being lost uniformly as you're powering up. You're going to use more energy as you increase in speed, and that lack of vacuum or the poor nature of the vacuum is going to hurt you more and more as you get bigger and you get faster and you get more energetic. It's going to cost you more CO2, less savings relative to an actual rocket. So they need to sort that properly.
Well, I think the biggest challenge, which they don't address properly here, they don't talk about, is that when they build the bigger one and they spin up to full speed, and it's actually at the levels of being able to launch things suborbitally, they're going to have this 100 kilogram or so mass on the end of a much bigger, much faster spinning disc or bladed system, which needs to be beautifully balanced in order to spin up safely to those speeds. An off-balanced system that rotates very fast. If anyone's had a dodgy washing machine, it's not a pleasant. It's not
starts walking across the room if it's
literally vibrating itself to pieces. Yeah. Now they can't get around this problem that if they design the thing to be beautifully balanced before the thing is loaded on the end of the arm, then it's going to be horribly imbalanced when it's being spun up. And if they design it so that it's beautifully balanced when it's got a 100 kilogram mounting on it, when they launch it, that system is now going to be horribly imbalanced after launch, and it's still going to be at full speed. So the kind of logical thing to do is have 200 kilogram masses on this thing, spin it up, release both at the same time, send one to space and dump one into the Earth. But
to balance that momentum,
the maths on a half mv squared of that, you're basically setting off a massive explosion next to the launch platform every time you. In fact, I don't know if you can. The HARP program, where they actually you literally use a massive cannon to fire something suborbital in the 60s. I think you probably already picked that up somewhere, right? But let me try and find it for you. But
well, so what have we got? So we'd have a half mv squared, so half the m. So let's say it's a 100 kilogram rocket. So that's 50 times by the velocity squared, and the velocity they said they get it up to is 5,000 miles per hour. So what's that in meters per second?
Call it 10 kilometers per second for order of magnitude.
Right.
Round numbers.
So 10 kilometers every single second. So that's 10,000 squared. So 10,000 squared times 50. 10,000.
Well, keep it times 100. Just keep it all nice and easy. And yes, we'll be getting it. Are we up in megajoules?
So what is it? 10,000 is the speed, right? 10,000 meters per second, yeah?
10,000 meters per second squared times another 100 for the mass.
So let's keep it simple to make it another 100 for the mass.
I'm trying to find this picture.
And then I've got, what have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 megajoules. 10 megajoules of energy going off, which is a huge amount of energy.
Don't dump that into the earth next to your thing.
I mean, how much is that relative to trying to think of the energy of like a nuclear bomb or something?
You definitely don't want to stand next to it. But that's why I was trying to find the HARP space gun picture. I don't know if you can quickly Google it and bring it up, but they literally had this cannon that they fired an object into sub-orbit with, and you can just see obviously that
it's quite a lot of TNT. It's quite a lot of TNT basically. It's way below a nuke, but it's a hell of a lot of. It's like setting up a pretty big explosion of TNT next to your machine, which isn't going to go.
It's like the world's largest cannon, which is what Project HARP pretty much was. So that's the problem. That's one of their problems, probably their biggest unanswered problem at the moment. When they actually launch this thing and they imbalance their centrifuge, how are they going to handle that? And if they handle it the simplest way, they're trying to dump that much energy into the earth with a dummy projectile at the same time.
What's the big problem with the, you mentioned the tumbling. Is this just that it's out of control, basically? The thing doesn't want to be tumbling on potentially all three axes. Here it's spinning around an axis, at least one axis. When it's coming out, is that just shows a lack of control? So
because of the nature of this, they can't like rifle the thing, so they can't send it out of the tube spinning fast, which is how rifles and a lot of other things that sort of auto stabilizing through the gyroscopic effect are doing. So if this thing has come and hit the Earth's atmosphere, as soon as it's left that penetrated that membrane and it's at a wonky angle, then it risks the tip immediately being decelerated while the rest is trying to come out, and you'll just set off a tumble. I mean, it's a horribly difficult. They're trying to solve like hypersonic flight while doing a bunch of other stuff at the same time. And hypersonic flight has been something that the Americans, the Russians, and the Chinese have been trying to solve for decades. It's not easy to control a hypersonic object, and they're kind of immediately dumping a hypersonic object from a vacuum into the thick low Earth orbit atmosphere, and that's a horrible control problem. Not surprised the first one tumbled around all over the place when they let it out.
So they said so to follow up on it, they said that they went and got this thing. So they launched it in New Mexico, which makes sense because if you're firing something off at a 30-degree angle, it's going to land a long way away, and it's going to come down on your head at whatever the terminal velocity of. It's not going to come down at the speed that you fired it up, because obviously the air resistance on the way down is going to slow it down to terminal velocity. But I imagine the terminal velocity of a rocket-shaped object falling to the Earth is pretty fast, and it's going to
be around the speed of sound.
Yeah.
We had we had the Grand Slam bomb designed by Barnes Wallis in World War II that was a conventional-looking bomb, and it was heavy enough and it spun itself up on free fall that it penetrated the Earth supersonically. So we know it's possible for an object shaped like this one to be supersonic in free fall, but it wouldn't be doing the Mach 5. It'll be doing on the way out or whatever. Exactly.
But they say they went and got this thing, and it was quote unquote absolutely flyable. Now I don't know. It sounds a bit of a weasel term, like an asteroid. An asteroid is flyable. A brick is flyable.
Exactly. What they mean is when they'd like shoveled all of the pieces into a box, they could FedEx the box back to the SpinLaunch site
and then fire it out. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. It seems a bit nondescript, to be honest, that it was absolutely flyable. But I guess you could bring these things down on unless they brought it down on a parachute. But I didn't see any evidence of that in this.
No, they've not talked about that
in this video. Maybe I missed it.
No. There's been no shot or news or information that it came down on a parachute.
No. So I guess the future of this, they've got an awful lot of things to solve, as you say. I think this is one of these ones, like we see it with Elon Musk and stuff all the time, don't we? When the company has a new funding deadline coming up, or there's a little bit of traction in the press, it's good to make one of these nice videos and sort of show what's going on. But but really they've got a hell of a lot of things that still need to be overcome. And they say that they're going to do another 30 suborbital test flights in the next 6 to 8 months. So I guess that's going to be the hard yards of making sure the thing is stable, making sure there's no tumbling, sorting out all these issues. That's going to be the hard physics and hard engineering they're going to have to do. And this is a nice sort of tech promo, look at us, we're amazing sort of PR piece. And this is how I've seen it being covered by, this is what kind of why I wanted to cover this, because I see a lot of, big science YouTubers and they're just like, oh, amazing, the biggest yeet in history and stuff, without actually looking at the difficulties and the science and the physics of what's going on. So it seems like they've got a hell of a lot of stuff that needs to be fixed before it becomes something viable.
And there is quite a list. I mean, even things like, if you move the video to the bit where it's kind of showing the CGI of it kind of opening up itself later in space and things like this, there's
is it this one?
Or when the motor's kicking. I think there's a part of the video, maybe it's not this video, but there's a part of the video where it shows the thing actually kind of opening up in CGI in the future and the rocket motor's kicking in. No, maybe it's not in this one. Right. But you see, one of the challenges they'll have of this thing being a liquid propellant rocket as well eventually is that this thing's decelerating the entire time, right? From the moment it leaves the tube and hits wind resistance.
It's decelerating the fastest immediately, right? And then it's decelerating slightly faster. Slightly slower as it goes up. But the fastest it's decelerating is literally as soon as it leaves the chamber, because that's when it's got its fastest speed.
And by definition, it's decelerating the entire time until it stops and falls again. And anything that's like decelerating in that manner while going up, you've got the issue that the liquid propellants for the fuel aren't sitting under your thrust, as is the case for a normal rocket, and are all held down in the tubes and the chambers being used. But this thing's actually decelerating and the stuff's pushed the other way and is actually high. So they can't even use conventional rocket engines that can be kind of gravity fed. They're going to have rocket engines that are actively pumping the fluid down.
That's interesting, because a conventional rocket is accelerating all the time, even though it has to put more energy in as it goes along. It's accelerating as it goes up into space. Whereas this thing, because it's not under power until a certain point, as you say, is decelerating all the time. So it's got this, it's got this situation where you have to.
So they're going to need to design the negative G rocket engine starter motor, which no one else ever needs. So they've got all sorts of interesting challenges ahead.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so a hell of a lot of work to do, a lot of physics, a lot of engineering challenges to overcome. So that's SpinLaunch, and we'll keep an eye on that. Another thing that sort of caught my eye this month was Russia up to no good, blowing up one of its own satellites. So this was a few weeks back now, 16th of November. Is this article from the BBC? So maybe I can get that up. So we've had enough of SpinLaunch. The 16th of November for this BBC article, and Russia essentially rocketed one of its own satellites. So Ramsey, what was going on here?
Well, these sorts of things actually happen every decade or so. We've had countries doing anti-satellite missile launches since the 60s, just flexing their muscles and proving that they can destroy satellites. And then that's honestly all it is, right? It's a demonstration of power every now and again. Don't forget, like, we can destroy your satellites kind of stuff. And actually, I don't know if you saw in the news a few days ago, Russia actually made a statement about their abilities to take out the 32 GPS satellites in the GPS constellation, for example.
There we go. It was in GPS World, so which sounds like one of those publications you get at the end of Have I Got News for You? So I'm glad you were on hand to.
It's one well known to me. GPS World and Inside GNSS are the
real page turner
of my field. I've been in these things many a time, I may add. So exactly. No surprise I threw this one across to you. So this is not uncommon, but it is, of course, to the international community of great dismay every time America, Russia, or China decide to prove once again, as they did 8 to 10 years ago, that they can blow up a satellite if they want to. I think what happened here was historically the anti-satellite weapons were able to take out low Earth orbit sats, and they were launched from aircraft. And I think this was a ground-based launch. And fundamentally, it was kind of proving that they've got more reach and more capability and can go and hit higher sats. But this was a really serious issue. Like, it caused the International Space Station to go into an emergency mode. And in fact, the debris will continue to threaten the International Space Station and I believe the Chinese station as well. And it even threatened a science mission that was doing a slingshot past the Earth. You probably remember the name better than I can't remember. It's Solar Orbiter or something.
Oh, is it Parker? Parker Solar.
Something that did a flyby of the Earth a few days ago, and everyone was worried that it might hit some of this debris.
Okay.
We can Google it in the midst of our chatting. But it's a big shame that this has happened because it's yet more debris in Earth orbit, and the last thing we need is more debris in Earth orbit.
So, yeah, it sounds like you say it's just a bit of a muscle flex. So they blew up apparently this Cosmos 1408, which was launched in 1982. So it was this 1-ton satellite, which has been dead for a while. Basically, it was a spy satellite that was launched in 1982. And obviously, it creates this huge debris field. Now, you can't sort of control where that thing's going to where all that debris is going to go if you've blown something up. So some of it rains down on the Earth, not too big a problem really because it burns up in the atmosphere, but some of it gets thrown up into higher orbit. And as you said, the crew of the International Space Station had to shelter in their capsule, so the Soyuz capsule, the Dragon capsule, and they closed all the hatches between the different modules. So if you get a puncture in one of the modules, you're going to be able to survive in one of the other modules. So it was a very serious situation. You can see a picture here of what one of these small pieces of debris of shielding you get on the International Space Station. Another one, here's a block of aluminium and a tiny block of, or a tiny impact from a sphere of aluminium. How much damage these things can do because they're orbiting so quickly. And then obviously you blow them up, they're going to keep that momentum, keep that speed and the extra speed of the explosion. They can really give something a wallop, cut through an oxygen tank, cut through the walls of the International Space Station. So a very, very serious incident. Funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that there's nothing that thick up in space.
Yeah.
Like the International Space Station, you're basically like your walls are like tinfoil.
Yeah.
So, it's not like this shielding that can protect against these impacts. It's just it's really, really, really dangerous.
So the interesting thing about this was, like you say, a muscle flex potentially, but there's 4 Americans, a German, and 2 Russians on board the International Space Station. So, I mean, I don't know how you feel when you're huddled up in your Soyuz capsule, wondering, what Mr. Putin has decided to do. Two Russians up there. So apparently that was not of massive concern. The reports say it produced 1,500 pieces of trackable debris. So obviously there's going to be hundreds and thousands of smaller pieces whipping around, and that's where the danger comes from. And as you mentioned, this is a really big problem now. So not only did people react because there was this immediate danger potentially to the International Space Station, but there's this wider problem of space debris. We've had 65 years of activity going on in space now. And there's like a million objects running around of 1 centimeter to 10 centimeters. So there's this huge debris field that's been built up. And if you get an impact of one of these things into pretty much anything that you send up, it's going to be a mission failure. So this has started to become a really big issue. We saw earlier in the year that, the Chinese rocket that they just left to fall back to Earth. We've now had this. There's a really big problem here, isn't there? I mean, you work with GPS satellites. Is it a problem that you guys have to worry about?
These sort of debris clouds are way lower than the mid-Earth orbit and geostationary orbit that things like our our GPS sats are at medium Earth orbit, and things like our satellite TV are geostationary orbit, which is even higher. So they're safe from these debris issues.
I guess you still have to go through them, though, right? Although that's a transitory, a low probability. But
you're absolutely right. The concern is more the ability to service and replace higher up stuff if you have this shell of shrapnel at low Earth orbit that has rendered, potentially rendering low Earth orbit satellites unusable is one problem. But making it impossible to exit the Earth anymore without going through this shrapnel shield would be a real horrible scenario for us to be in. I suppose it would mean that venture capitalists could pump hundreds of millions into startups who were offering to go and vacuum it all up.
There has been some talk of sort of deorbiting the bigger pieces, but I mean, how you're going to, pick up millions of little bullets essentially, that seems like a hard ask. Obviously space is big, there's a lot of space, but the closer you come to the Earth, the smaller that shell is, so the more stuff you put into that, as you say, it's becoming harder and harder to get out of it, and the higher and higher probability that you're going to get hit by something. So what was so you're saying that the reason they're probably flexing is because this is a new type of technology. I think it said this was only several countries have the ability to take out satellites from the ground, which was Russia, China, and India, basically. And I guess now Russia's saying, look, we have the ability to do this. Yeah. You mentioned that this has been done in the past. China did it to one of their retired weather satellites in 2007, apparently. So it seems like this is an arena that's opening up, right? So we had under Trump, they started the Space Force, and there was a lot of hoo-ha about this. It's even got into the popular domain with like a Netflix sort of comedy show for this. It seems like space is becoming the new frontier of warfare, of at least telecommunications warfare, maybe actual warfare, and Russia's really wanting to stamp down and say, look, we are a player in this arena. Is that what you think it is, basically?
Sadly, and I find it very, very strange as well, because it's not a big reach to point out that if you can launch satellites into space, and rendezvous ships with the International Space Station, that you're capable of sending ammunition up to hit one. Like, it's kind of obvious. So like proving it is irrelevant. So I just don't understand it. I mean, it's no shock that they shot down one of their own like ex-spy satellites, right? So, but I mean, no one's really going up in space and plucking out decades-old spy satellites to go and look at decades-old technology. It's just not the done thing. It's just not required. So I find it very strange. I think all of the nations accept that any nation that can successfully rendezvous with two craft in space would be capable of rendezvousing ammunition with a craft. Would just
be capable of firing a missile and blowing something up, which seems like an infinitely easier task because you don't have all the sort of the hard docking situation on the other end. You just slam into it and blow up.
Much easier to hit something too fast than it is just right. Yeah.
So that was that. Obviously, received a lot of condemnation. I don't think they really cared, and then it seems to have kind of gone away after that. But a very serious incident, and we'll have to see how that sort of shakes out going forward. The other thing that came up, we're very space focused this month, by the way. You mentioned that when we're going through the topics we might discuss. James Webb. So we talked about James Webb Space Telescope last month with Jason, and we were talking about. You mentioned that there might be several months of fear, which I think was only.
Jinxed it, didn't I?
Yeah, you did jinx it because you said what was it? What did it turn out to be? Like a couple of weeks or something? 10 days.
I accidentally said 11. I think it's like 11 months of fear,
and it's like 11 days or something.
11 hours of fear or 11 days of fear or something as everything unfolds. So I was out by a significant unit, and then I jinxed it because
but it's been 20 years of terror. Like it's been they've been saying it's going to go for ages. But yes, you did jinx it.
Yeah, they're now all definitely terrified as to whether they've broke it. Yeah.
Yes. So apparently so just to get people up to speed again. So the launch of this $10 billion James Webb Space Telescope, it's been delayed again, which is a little bit Groundhog Day, because this thing has been, slated to go or in the works to go for over 20 years, and it keeps getting held back, keeps getting slowed down. NASA's budgets get cut, it gets pushed back again, and we're kind of in the final knockings of getting this thing up into space, and it's hit another little snag. So it's been transported to Europe's spaceport in Kourou in French Guiana, where it's going to be launched by an Ariane 5 rocket supplied by ESA, the European Space Agency. And it was slated to be launched on, I believe, the 18th of December. So in a couple of weeks. And that's been pushed back by 4 days. And they say because of an quote-unquote incident, which produced a quote-unquote, again, very significant vibration. The jokes write themselves. But it sounds like...
they dropped it. I think they dropped it.
Yes, this is what it sounds like. So apparently, according to the official documentation or the official spokesman from NASA, a sudden unplanned release of a clamp band took place. And a clamp band is essentially something that fixes the spacecraft to a launch adapter, and then that launch adapter joins onto the rocket. So essentially some sort of bracket that attaches to the telescope and then onto the rocket. They were attaching these together, and it looks like that snapped, and it sounds like the thing just sort of, if it didn't fall over completely, it sort of toppled and bashed itself, knocking onto the floor. And this produced a vibration through the kit. And as we discussed last month, this is a very, very delicate piece of kit that has to unfold in a certain way. All the mirrors have to go into certain positions. So having a very significant vibration go through it, they're concerned that you might have shaken something out of place or damaged some of the delicate mechanisms or electronics. So as you say, it does, for all the fancy wording, it sounds like something snapped and it basically whacked onto the floor.
It's a great shame. I know I laughed about it, but it is a great shame because they've said they're going to delay it by 4 days. All they can do is run some tests on various subsystems and try and check all the sensor readings and things that would have been mounted on there. I mean, it's designed to survive all of the shaking and vibrations of launch, but if they genuinely dropped the thing some distance onto the ground, then it could be a really significant problem. And they can't actually just...
You can't unfurl it all and be going over it and
fold it back. No, I mean, these things have to be designed, just the nature of how complicated and what they are and how big they are. This thing has been designed to be built all packaged up. And the only time it will ever go through the process of unfurling itself, completely unable to be refurled again, is when it's up at the Lagrange point. So
you can do your sort of scans from the outside, some visual inspections, as you say. Maybe you can power up some of the electronics, see that it's still operating and responding, but you're not going to be able to go in and see, oh no, there's a scratch on that, or that little doohickeys out of place or broken. It's going to be suck it and see when we get up there. They say. Yeah. NASA say they've convened. They say they've convened, which I liked, an anomaly board. Which apparently that's just a few scientists called the anomaly board who are going to investigate and perform additional tests. So, like you say, there's a limit to what you can do, right?
Yeah, that's tricky.
So I guess.
I mean, yeah.
We'll suck it and see where we are.
Grandfather clock.
Yeah.
So
it's going to be Christmas, isn't it? It's going up on the 22nd of December. It's going to get one more pushback. It's going to go up at Christmas after all of this time waiting for it to go 20 years. It's going to go up at Christmas, which feels about right.
And hopefully it won't just explode on the launch pad, because that would be the fitting end to this crazy story, right?
Yeah. Well, the worst part it'll be even worse if they get it up there, they unfold it, and the bit that's broken just sort of drifts off into
away.
Drifts off into the distance, and then Russia blows it up, just for no reason. Right. So moving on from there, we are very space based this month. So the DART mission also set off. So the DART mission was launched this month, and this is the mission to smash into an asteroid and essentially deflect it to change its orbit. And the idea behind this is that in the future, if one of these asteroids were to be on a collision course to intersect with the Earth, and we saw it in time, we could give it a little bit of a nudge and we could change its trajectory. So the idea of this is essentially to smash quite a low mass satellite, but going very fast, into the surface of an asteroid and change its orbit. So Ramsey, any thoughts on this before I sort of go into it?
Yeah, I mean, these sorts of missions are very important, and we've been talking for many years about trying to get more of these kind of tests of how significant these threats are. I mean, we're all pretty confident now that, you know, the reason there's no dinosaurs lumbering around dominating YouTube anymore is because of the impact of a certain rock. And so we do need to investigate the ways of protecting ourselves from being wiped out in the same manner. And we don't fully understand enough about the makeup of all of these different bodies and how we might try to deal with them. So whether they're rock solid like granite, or whether they're like basalt and would crumble, and there's probably variations in different types, just like with all sorts of rocks on Earth, different meteorites and asteroids and comets, probably made of slightly different materials, being created in different ways and have different compositions. So
so they said this is a huge source of error. Actually, they were saying when they smash into it, is this going to be like a ball of powder that's loosely held together, like we saw when we had the I forget the name of the asteroid that they smashed into. It's like Beidou or something similar like that, and it sort of punched very deep into the surface of the asteroid. Or, as you say, is it going to be a block of pretty solid rock, and that's going to change how it's going to change its orbit, depending on its structure.
We've got selection bias on the ones we have on Earth, right? The only ones that we pick up on the surface of the Earth and stick in museums and stuff are, by definition, the ones that weren't of the composition that doesn't get through, and all of that kind of stuff. So we need to kind of go out there and actually play amongst the rocks and do a bit of science. And there's no better science than smashing things really hard.
So it launched this month, and it's going to eventually get onto a collision course, and we're going to see if we can essentially deflect a piece of rock which is a few hundred meters across, because these are the sort of size of rock that could cause continent-wide or higher levels of devastation. So it launched on a Falcon 9 rocket at 6:20 GMT on Wednesday. So this was November 24th. So the Wednesday around there. So just the end of the month, basically, from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. So Elon Musk doing his part to save the world, apparently, with his Falcon 9s. And the plan is that the spacecraft will smash into this object called Dimorphos. Now, surely this is just a very simple name, because it's got this sort of barbell shape. Dimorphos just means two shapes, right? So it's just two lumps. So this sort of double lumpy rock called Dimorphos, which is 160 meters across, and which is orbiting this other asteroid called Didymos, which is 780 meters across. Now, you might ask, why are we smashing into an asteroid that's orbiting another asteroid? Well, that's because if you smashed into a single asteroid, the change that you made to the orbit of the asteroid around the sun would be very, very, very small. And it'd be very hard to detect any change at all using Earth-based telescopes. So what they've got is this situation where we have essentially a little space-based laboratory where you have an orbit of Dimorphos around Didymos, And if you whack Dimorphos, you will be able to see the change in the orbital speed of Dimorphos relative to what it is now after the impact. And the way they do that is by looking essentially at the transits of Dimorphos around Didymos. You can see how quickly it orbits around Didymos, and if you change that significantly, you know you've changed the orbital period, its speed of orbit, its position of orbit, and you can get an idea of how easy it is for us to change essentially the orbit and trajectories of these bodies. So that's the idea. We had to find this sort of little space-based laboratory, this little orbiting system. And it's going to smash into Dimorphos at a speed of around 15,000 miles per hour. And it should change the speed of the object only by a fraction of a millimeter per second. So a very, very tiny amount, but an amount that we should be able to see from the Earth in this binary system. So seems like a very small amount, but if you can see one of these things coming towards Earth in time, a very, very small deflection might be enough to change the trajectory significantly and stop it whacking into Earth. I guess this all comes down to really, it has to go hand in hand with better mapping of these objects, right? Because if you're saying that you can deflect these things by a tiny amount, you're also saying that you can detect them in time, that a tiny deflection is going to be good enough. But if you don't see the thing coming, then this doesn't help you.
Yeah. It's a bit chicken and egg. The things that are too big for us to have any hope moving are the ones that we'll have plenty of time to panic about on the way in.
Exactly. So I think they said here, what did they say? So in 2005, the Congress in the US directed NASA to discover and track 90% of the near-Earth asteroids that are larger than 140 meters. So that's all well and good. You can see these, they're larger, but we've only discovered 40% of those. And even the ones that are smaller than that can do a massive amount of damage. So we're still constrained to quite a small area of phase space where we can only deflect ones that are in this sort of corridor of mass. And even in that corridor of mass, we can't find all of them. So as you say, you can find the really big ones, but you probably can't deflect them with this procedure. You can't find the really small ones, which you would be able to deflect, but you're not going to deflect them because you couldn't find them. So there's still big problems with this.
Yeah, and as you say, the long-term hope here would be actually developing kind of a deep space network of sensing, in effect, so that further out in the solar system, we do have some probes and other objects orbiting much further out than our orbit, helping to kind of track these objects. That's very sci-fi. We don't really have any such thing at the moment of these casual bodies that are sensors that we put out into space just to orbit the sun at great distances and send us hello messages and warning that stuff's coming.
I thought this was found it amazing actually that we can even see these things. So these things actually come back as kind of a single pixel of light, a single point of light, because they're very close together in the sky. But apparently the way they see them is by the reflected light from the sun, which makes sense because this is how we see the moon, right? It reflects the light from the sun. But you can see the orbital period from essentially the transits blocking out the reflected light from the sun. And they reckon that they'll change the orbit from 11 hours and 55 minutes to 11 hours and 45 minutes. So still a very, very small change, and subject to, as you say, whatever the structure is going to change what that delta is.
So is it that the brightness of the pixel is going through a nice sinusoid, and so they know that there's two objects orbiting each other?
Yeah, exactly.
Will change the rate of the brightness variation of the pixel and that's it.
Correct. That's how they're doing it, which I thought was kind of cool. So you can't really see, quote unquote, what's going on, but from the amount of light that's coming, you can get an idea of that orbital period and how you've changed it, which is pretty cool. Obviously, this is no good maybe for really, really big asteroids, like you said. So we're back to Armageddon and nuclear bombs if the thing gets pretty close, I think. So we might need to. I don't know if there's any plans to actually not do Armageddon, but do the nuke of an asteroid. I'm sure maybe Russia's thinking about it. But
I don't think there's any more official plans than what's been in sci-fi movies exactly.
But is that not something we should? Is that not something we should try as well if we're going to do this?
This is definitely one of those things on the big list of like the things that could wipe out humanity, along with a more serious virus than coronavirus and us killing ourselves in World War III and nukes and this kind of stuff. Certainly being whacked by a celestial object is really up there on the list. And the problem is just the scale of the speed and the mass of these things and how puny our abilities to get energy and mass and matter out there are. And so there are things like trying to mount engines to stuff and trying to mount a solar sail to things, and even talk of like changing the albedo, so painting the entire thing white so that the solar pressure over months and years changes. And as you say, at least we're confident and comfortable that the farther away and the earlier we can apply even the slightest thrust, as long as it's continuous.
I'm going to have to do that. I'm going to have to do a video on that now. The calculation, how much white paint would we need to put on a big asteroid to change its course by so much, given the new radiation pressure that it would receive?
I think that is the smallest of all of the things. But it's
surely it would be better to put a mirror on it rather than white paint, right? Because you get the double.
Well, there's your YouTube video calculation right there. I think there might be the complexity of trying to get a massive mirror versus pots of paint out into space. See James Clerk Maxwell telescope.
I could just see like the advertisements for those jobs. Do you like painting? Are you interested in space?
Adventurous.
Exactly. Are you an adventurous type?
Just indeed. It would be a one-way mission. That's why it should always be robots. Don't have people that want to come home again after they've gone all the way to Dimorphos to paint it white.
After they've gone through the shrapnel field.
Yeah.
Got to the asteroid. Yeah.
Got heavy dose of cosmic rays because there's no magnetic field out there to look after them. But it is an interesting one actually to try and revisit the latest thinking on all of these things. I don't think we have any major new technological advances that could help us. Potentially the ion drive, right? That might be the only thing that's come along in the last couple of decades, because people have been worrying about this problem, So the problem with nukes surely is there's no air, right? So you're losing a lot of your force is lost by the fact that you most definitely do. So exactly the way nukes are actually most effective on Earth is that they're airburst. And it's actually to do with killing people in a variety of mechanisms rather than destroying matter. But yeah, the concept of nuking an asteroid would probably be what was in Armageddon, where they buried and set off. They bury and set off a nuke. It would be indeed to kind of try and break things up, but just the sheer maths on the amount of nukes you need. I mean, they're scary objects in terms of the number of people that live in a city and how easy it is to turn off a city with one nuke. But that is not the same as trying to make a 200-meter diameter object change its course. So yeah, you'd have to get on there, bury it inside, and blow the whole thing to pieces. But yeah, the ion drive might be the only new thing that we're bringing to the party from this problem. Otherwise, the problem is a well-documented and well-known issue of how puny we are in terms of deflecting stuff. But an ion drive is basically a really, really weak thrust, but over a very, very long period of time. So we have ion drive. So you're saying land on the thing, put an ion drive on it, and let the momentum sort of push it away from
from danger.
That's probably the best bet, that you put something that has as big as you can get thrust, but the longest lifetime thrust you can possibly have something create, and you get there early enough. And if you push with a constant force for long enough, you'll eventually move a mountain.
Yeah, these all seem to be. You have to see it early enough, though, right? This is the problem. We get these things in the tabloids now and again. You know, these early warning. You know, asteroid passed close to Earth or whatever, and it was never really that close. But you see these things every now and again, and sometimes they don't seem to have much warning that they were coming.
No, there's definitely that early warning, remote sensing aspect to it as well, which needs to be solved somehow.
The worst thing, of course, so this asteroid, just so people are clear, it doesn't pose any sort of danger to us. You don't need to run out screaming into the streets. So they're just doing this test. I guess it would be ironic if they put it onto a collision course with us, but I don't think that's incredibly likely. But it is quite a big thing. Like you sort of alluded to it. We're the first species, as far as we know, and the first species in the entire universe, as far as we know, that has reached this level of technology where we can consider countering a threat like this. So it is quite a big thing, even as we think about how many potentially populated worlds there are. Eventually, you're going to run into this problem. There is going to be an asteroid that's hurtling towards your planet, and if you can't do anything about it, you're probably done for.
Yep. No, indeed. And they don't even need to be that big a rock to cause significant problems, as we saw with the dinosaurs, right?
Mm. So I think they said, what did they say in this article? They said if you're getting up to basically a few hundred, if you're getting up to a kilometer, that's basically a global disaster size of rock. And there's a lot of these things out there. If you're getting over 500 meters, you're talking an entire continent decimated. So they don't have to be that big before you're doing some real damage. And there's a lot of these things out there. So we'll have a look at this, and we'll see how they get on. I think it's going to be in about 6 months where it does its thing, and then obviously it's going to be a while afterwards to work out how much change has been made. So we'll keep an eye on that, and I guess we'll revisit that in the summer or towards the end of next year. So that's the DART mission. Anything else come up, Ramsey? How's your time?
Yeah, now's probably a good time to wrap up. We've punched over an hour.
Right. So we'll wrap up. I wanted to talk a little bit about Halo and what the gravity might be like on a Halo, because the game Halo Infinite has come out, but perhaps we can discuss that another time. So I think that's probably a good place to wrap up, and we'll come back to that. Anything else, Ramsey, jumped out this month just before we wrap up, or anything that you think's coming down the pipe soon?
No, I think as we discussed earlier, seeing what happens with James Clerk Maxwell is going to be the most interesting thing this month.
Yeah, James Webb.
James Webb, exactly. So yes, I wait with bated breath to see how badly they approach it.
No flying cars this month?
Oh, no new ones that crept on my radar. No, but I'll get an update for next time. I promise.
You said one final thing just before you go. You were complaining about the physics in the movie Ad Astra. I think you maybe saw it last month. What got you upset?
Well, that would have been a good one to touch on, our very space focused theme. In fact, very, very, very SpinLaunch one. We should have thought this. We should have grabbed the clip. There's a very dodgy bit towards the end of the film where Brad Pitt has to get himself back to a ship from a different spaceship, and the only mechanism he's got to do it is to go stand on the spinning radar arm mounted to the top of this thing and jump off it.
No.
Just the right SpinLaunch style, less than 3 degree error, to rendezvous with something that looks like it's hundreds of meters away from him. And of course, because it's a film, he successfully rendezvous with it, smashes into it, bounces along it, grabs something, arrests his motion, climbs on board, goes home, and it's just no worries about broken bones or ripped spacesuits in this story.
So that upset you a little bit. My worst. So you talked about Armageddon. So in Armageddon, they say that the asteroid or whatever's coming towards them is the size of Texas. So I mean that is insanely big. Like I don't think we know like anything that, or maybe the biggest ones are.
The dinosaur killing one was like somewhere between 20 and 50 miles across or something,
right? So which is a lot smaller than Texas, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's mental. And then when they're digging, he's like, "Oh, I will make 800 feet." I'm like, "You just said it was the size of Texas, and they're digging 800 feet. That's just like scratching the surface." Like, so that was my, I love that film, and like it's ridiculous, it's absurd, but you enjoy it. But when I was watching it, I watched it again the other day. I was like, hang on a minute, those numbers don't really make any sense. I think there's supposed to be there's some weird fault line. I think they sort of
you might be right. They decide that there's fault lines that they just need to encourage to break open.
Just need to get down to 800 feet, and it'll drop like right down to the middle of Texas in this fault line, and it'll be fine. I think that's the idea. But some interesting physics. Right. Okay. Let's call it a day then, and we'll maybe do the Halo thing another time, because I've been trying to do some Gauss's law on it. It doesn't seem to add up. You can't jump around like they think you can. So stand by for that, and I'll do the physics of Halo.
Okay. Cool. Well, there might be a few other computer games you can sanity check the physics of. I remember an interesting website that was looking at the physics of Angry Birds when that came out, and how that they weren't actually using 1/r² gravity for that game.
I was
going
to say you can probably work out what planet a lot of these games are on just by doing the G of the planet. So maybe I'll take a look. But anything, having done a physics degree, as I'm sure you'll be aware, anything that has preferred directions now scares me. Like, this thing is not the same in this direction as it is side to side. And
because Halo is on a big donut instead of a sphere.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that sets my physicist spider senses off, and I don't like it. Not least of all because supposedly you could walk off the edge, right? So we're back to 500 years ago. But I'll have a look at that, and we'll see where we get. Ramsey, thank you very much for taking the time as ever.
Cheers, Sam. Always a pleasure.
Go sort out your Christmas presents for your children, or they'll never forgive you. And we'll chat again soon, buddy.
Awesome.
Thank
you.
I'll talk to you in a bit.
Now, Sam.
Peace out.